A Swift Kickin' Ass, episode 36.
Today's episode is a special feature covering Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power.
Welcome, I'm Tom Stewart. I'm joined with my childhood friend, who I've known for over 40 years, my friend John Curren. How you doing, John?
Doing great, Tom. How are you?
Good. Today we're going to talk once more about Robert Greene's best-selling book, The 48 Laws of Power. And today we're up to law number 22. Use the surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power. When you are weaker, never fight for honor's sake. Choose surrender instead. Surrender gives you time to recover, time to torment and irritate your conqueror, time to wait for his power to wane. Do not give him the satisfaction of fighting and defeating you. Surrender first. By turning the other cheek, you infuriate and unsettle him. Make surrender a tool of power.
You just love that, don't you, Tom?
I love the word power.
To infuriate them and confuse them. And I love this law myself. I know on our show that we often talk about where people are in their quest for power. Are they just starting out, starting to accumulate some power in their lives, or are they trying to maintain it? And I think that this law addresses any place where you are on that spectrum, and it's really focusing on the decision making process that leads to action, because it's, as you said, you can't win every battle, and sometimes you need to walk away. And I think this is, this tactic and saying surrender gives you time to recoup, to strengthen yourself and come back stronger. Related to the law 15, if you want to crush the enemy, sometimes you're not powerful enough to crush the enemy. Looking back at the United States and the Revolutionary War, we had to use guerrilla warfare because the British forces were so large, and there was no way we could beat them by their own rules. So we created our own rules and dispersed our forces to gain an advantage.
What's funny is I've been listening to Hardcore History, which is Dan Carlin's famous podcast, and he was talking about the Monguls and with Genghis Khan. And one of the tactics, because back in the old days, a lot of the warfare happened, one army met on one side of the field, one army met on the other, and all their thousands of people were waiting, ready to battle, where the Mongols fought more almost like the Americans did against the British. They did more guerrilla warfare, and they would come from all angles. They would surround them, and they were so quick and light and traveled so fastly that they beat armies that outnumbered them by like 40 to 60,000 men.
It keeps your enemy off. It takes your enemy off guard. I mean, look at the Game of Thrones. I know that the guerrilla warfare was used because he was one of the bastards. Gosh, that limits the characters, doesn't it? I'm terrible at character names, but basically, the army was camped. They're waiting for there was too much snow on the ground to go in, so they couldn't sneak. They were outnumbered, so they snuck in just a few men into camp at night and burned up all of their provisions and took their ammo or whatever. I mean, they damaged the enemy by using a very small force, and they came in the middle of the night and they did their damage and they left.
Right. You're right. That was the bastard son. When they had already taken over Winterfell, and they I can't think of his name either, but the guy was marching.
It wasn't Snow. Yeah, it was
the guy with the witch. Where she abandoned him, and they.
I thought it was someone else. Anyhow,
maybe we're talking about two different parts of the
I
show.
think that's okay, because
I was
takes us
wondering
way
why you
off
were bewildered.
topic. Talk about Game of Thrones. I think that we can apply this law about
Stannis. I was thinking of Stannis.
Stannis.
That was
That's
his
right.
name.
Well,
Stannis was
it
ready to
wasn't him.
attack Winterfell, and the bastard son went in with 20 men, remember? And he burned up the horses and the food and let the horses go. And then the next morning, half his troops left because they were discouraged.
Right. Anyhow, let's get
Stannis
back on track,
Baratheon.
man.
That's right.
I love talking Games of Thrones, and I think we'll have a special Game of Thrones episode
Absolutely.
just
It's
so
rife.
we can
It's rife.
do this. So anyhow, Law 22 and using the surrender tactic. Transforming weakness into power. Now, if you think about it, weakness or strength is very relative. We'll use the ant for this example. For their size, they're one of the strongest creatures around, very strong. But we can step on them with ease, and especially if they're red and they try to bite you, which just happened to me today. But strength and weakness is relative. The ant is strong for their size, and we all have our own strengths and weaknesses. But are they really weaknesses, or is it just something that maybe other people do better? Like I felt that way when I played the saxophone in band in high school. I could play okay, but there were so many people that were better than me, and it was not my strength. And then I switched to play bass guitar, something I really loved, really enjoyed, and I continue playing to this day. So that's fun for me. I had to let that weakness go.
That's interesting because one of the reasons that I quit band, I too played saxophone, if you remember,
right?
And I used to have to push somehow. I got where they needed someone to push the amplifier for the guy that was playing the bass guitar. It wasn't you; it was one of your buddies. And so basically, I couldn't play. I had to march behind this guy pushing his bass guitar amp. And sitting there marching like an idiot, pushing a little hand truck. And
so
I was
you surrendered.
I was like, this sucks. I'm quitting.
Yeah, you were a year behind me, so yeah, I had already left.
I mean, can you imagine today that happening? And some parent would be like, "My son's not going to push a bit." Well, back when I was a kid, I didn't say anything. My parents probably had no idea. I just came home.
It was
one
just
day,
cool to have a bass guitar on the football field.
Not if you're marching behind an amp, it wasn't.
You know what? Honestly, it wasn't that much fun marching in front of it because I forget the guy's name, but he wasn't paying attention and he almost mowed me over with the cart. I was playing my bass and just almost knocked me over on my face. I was so mad. But anyhow, we're gonna get through this one way or the other.
All right. So when we talk about surrender, one vision that comes to mind for me is in a hurricane, right? In a hurricane, the biggest, strongest trees always get uprooted. If you have an oak tree or, a ficus tree, they're gone. The next day they're broken because they're so stiff they don't yield. But however, if you have a palm tree, the palm tree bends and flexes. Same thing like the willow. Yeah, and it survives. And if you ever seen palm trees, they bend like, you would think they would break, but they're flexible and they yield. They yield to the stronger force and they survive. And it's the same thing as this law.
And if you're not a tree and we could still bend. In fact, I was thinking that our educational system always tries to make our weaknesses stronger. Like if we're bad at math, you have to work extra hard to get stronger, to pass the test and get the test scores that the school's looking for. But in the real world, what I think we should really do, and there's actually a book you can get to determine what your strengths are. It's called Strengths Finder. It's written by Tom Rath, and it's a really short little book. I don't have any stake in this book, but I did take the test, and I found out that I'm a learner, and I'm a relator, amongst other things. So I know what my strengths are, and I can work to help develop them and make my strengths even stronger. And let go of your weaknesses. Just surrender to them. Recognize that, hey, you know what? I'm never going to be good at that, and let it go.
It's
And
funny. The United States military, when I got out of the Air Force, I had to take a very similar test, and it was define your strengths, and it was interesting.
yeah,
I liked it. I mean, I found out, my strengths. I should be a lawyer, a journalist, which do work in the media, someone that finds information because that's my skill, and I know that at work all the time. I'm very resourceful, but I wouldn't maybe have identified that without having that test. I might have thought about it, but that kind
yeah.
of pinpoint, and it's very similar to that Strength Finders.
And Robert Greene, he says it throughout the book. You need to know yourself, and knowing yourself will allow you to better leverage your power, because we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, and to keep an open mind too, and look at others in terms of strength and weakness, especially in the days of the court. If others knew your weaknesses, they would use that against you.
This is a common, principle in the martial arts. And especially like when you think back even to sword fighting, you were talking about Game of Thrones. That whenever they were fighting, if one got the better of the other one, they would always say yield. And it's the same thing when I'm doing jujitsu and someone gets you in a point where they're either going to choke you out or break a bone. You say tap, and it's just like crying uncle. But it allows you to get better, and you come back to
Right.
fight again. If you just had pride and said no, I'm going to fight to the end, you wouldn't last very long,
Yeah.
and you would never
Yeah.
get better.
I know you and I always use this term, and there was a great popular commercial about it, about sticking it to the man, and kind of joke, and you're like, well, aren't you the man, and you're sticking it to yourself? It's kind of funny, but most of us challenge authority and try to defy authority every chance we get. I guess I know I do, and we can argue against it and get angry and emotional about it, but there are personal consequences associated with that. Sticking it to the man is really sticking it to those who have power, and sometimes we resent people who are in power. But there could be personal consequences. Like, for instance, if you don't like your job and you want to stick it to the man, then that means you're not going to have a job anymore. And for me, that's a source of power. That's a source of income. So doing that would have a huge negative consequence to me. And my wife would probably really make me sleep on the couch until I found a new job. But you can be labeled as an outcast. It could mean imprisonment or death by trying to just stick it to the man. So I think what Robert Greene is saying take more of a subtle approach, and at least on the outside, appear to defer to authority. Say, yes, sir, no, ma'am, yes, ma'am, how high. But inside, be firm in your beliefs, and don't ever give that up. Be polite, but tell the truth in a way that isn't presented as a challenge. I think you can be. It's playing with words, but this is a game. The game of power is something that we all have. Something we all play, whether we want to or not.
And you see it in every great movie, every TV show that has to do with two forces fighting each other. You always see the villain. Of course, the villain always tells the hero his plan, but it's part of that power. It's part of telling. It's a game. It's like a chess game that they're playing.
Yeah, and what's funny about with the movies is that the villains never are good shots. I mean, they could fire a gun and they couldn't hit like a billboard.
Well, now my
don't know
son,
why
my
that
my son says we had this discussion last night because MythBusters was on talking about Star Wars, and he says that the accuracy of the stormtroopers is not based on the stormtroopers; it's their blasters that are not accurate, and they're skewed, so they have to try to compensate.
That's just so funny, to raise your kids and they have that level of understanding.
Oh yeah, I'm getting schooled. I'm getting schooled about Star Wars from my 12-year-old.
But getting back on track, I'm not saying don't change your beliefs, don't compromise your values, but do change the way you act and react to others, and never argue opinion, because you can't change people's opinions, especially if they're in power. You just have to surrender and defer to that until you're in a position of power and a stronger place to argue. It's a strategic advantage. And when in the case of work, if your boss is giving you a hard time and you need that paycheck, get yourself into a position to where you don't need that paycheck, and then take your stand and say, screw you, I'm getting the hell out of here because I own my house, I own my car, I got money in the bank. My rich uncle died and left me a millionaire, so I'm out of here, jerk.
You know who else was a big fan of this technique? Was Jesus. He's famous for talking about turning the other cheek, right? And that's a surrender tactic. It's also and I mean, you look back at Martin Luther King, you look back at Gandhi. They all used this technique, but even though they were passive, they were still strong.
Well, I think it's about putting thought behind your actions and not just reacting to someone else's action, because if it escalates over time. One action is taken, the other person reacts. That creates more hatred, more anger, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing until it's just way out of control. And that's it's all about applying a strategy and thinking about your actions. And often, like Greene said, if you surrender, you leave your enemy kind of scratching their head saying, isn't he mad? Kind of like when your friend Mike took my bike apart when I was 15.
I forgot about that.
And loosened all the nuts. He loosened all the nuts and bolts on my bike. So when I went to go drive it off, the wheels were wobbling.
That's a great trick.
I wish I would have actually. I don't think I didn't surrender to that, but I guess I just went home and I tightened up to all the nuts and bolts and started to work out, and thinking that I could gain enough strength to start a fight with him the next day. And I think it was a one-hit fight. I mean, he got one hit and I got one hit, and then that was it. We both walked away.
I don't even remember you guys fighting.
I do. It was we exchanged one hit apiece, and then that was it. And it was like, okay, walked away. But my grandfather, my dad told me the story about my grandfather, and it certainly applies. He, I guess this was in the 1940s or 50s, and my grandfather went into a bar and was talking with his friends, and this guy came up, this really big guy came up and started messing with him. And my grandfather was saying, let's go outside, let's go outside. You want to handle this? Let's go outside and we'll fight. So they went outside, and as soon as they got outside, he says, hey, listen, buddy, I was with my friends. I didn't want to, appear like I was a coward, and I really don't want to fight you. And can we just, can I buy you a drink or something? And the guy started to laugh, and when the guy started to laugh, my grandfather hauled off and just knocked him out. Yeah, and again, he surrendered. He basically gave in at that time. He raised the white flag, but it was just to throw him off, throw the enemy or his opponent off guard, and as soon as he had the chance, he let him have it.
I was talking about Genghis Khan earlier, right? Well,
Yeah.
that's the same technique that the Mongols would use. Often they would come to a city and they would say, if you surrender now, we'll let you live. If you don't, it's going to be really, really bad. And then a lot of times the people would surrender because they had their reputation, and they would kill them anyways, or
Right.
they would draw, the Mongols themselves would flee in terror, and the armies would pursue them and scatter out, and they would pursue them over hundreds of miles. And then the Mongols would lead them into like a pass where they had other Mongols waiting, and then they'd start attacking, and they'd turn around and they would just annihilate the army because
strategic advantage.
Right.
I mean, we talked about that with the United States Army. I mean, as our country was forming, we used guerrilla warfare because there was no way we could beat them, soldier to soldier. There was just no way to do that. And we couldn't play by their rules, so we made our own. And that's what I think Robert Greene is saying, is that throughout this book, we need to make our own rules and leverage whatever resources we have or whatever advantage we have. We have to leverage that in the best way possible. When we're talking about weakness, we're not just talking about, the lacking strength or the condition or state of lacking strength. It's also, weakness is defined as something that's seen as a fault or a disadvantage. And like I said, speaking from a personal level, we can't all be good at everything. And sometimes we push ourselves trying to be somebody that we're not. And that's really just a waste of energy at the end if you either have it or you don't. And oftentimes, and that's where it comes into knowing yourself. And if the better you know yourself, the better you know your own strengths and weaknesses and can work towards building strength.
Absolutely.
And remember, it's all relative, and strength and weakness is not necessarily a fact. It's an opinion. What's a strength? When one person considers a strength, another person might consider weakness. Like Don Henley sings it. Be strong enough to be weak. It's showing emotion, crying as a man. If you were a man and you would cry, in the past, a lot of people would see that as a weakness. I think that perception has changed, and now people see that as a strength. Oh, I guess no one really likes a crybaby, and you look down as being a weakling.
It's funny,
sitting around crying all the time.
You learn that at such a young age. I would see my son go through that, where he was a little kid, like 6 years old, and he would not want to cry. You'd see him holding back the tears, but he would not. It was like, it's okay. You're going to get frustrated, and it's going to take time to learn how to, to suppress your tears from coming out your eyes. But
yeah, I mean, I was raised not to cry, and in fact, I talked to my dad about this a long time ago, and let him know about this, and he felt terrible. But I remember a time when I was crying, and he held me up in front of the mirror and basically ridiculed me. He's like, "Oh, look at the little monkey crying," and stuff like that. And he didn't remember doing that, but boy, it stuck in my mind, and it took a long time to kind of accept that. And I remember when my grandmother died, and she was an only child, and I felt like I had to be very strong for my mom, so I didn't cry. I was just there for my mom. And shortly after the funeral, I started developing these major headaches, and they just wouldn't go away. And I went to the doctor, and they gave me, this was before Motrin was over the counter, gave me 800 milligrams of Motrin, huge horse pill. I would take that pill, and it would take my headache away for like, 5 minutes, and then it would come back strong. And I had, X-rays, and I had scans, and it never went away until one day when I was driving down the road and I heard a song on the radio that reminded me of my grandmother, and I just lost it. And I was by myself, and I was in the car driving, and I had to actually pull over and I just let it all out all at once. And I'll tell you, I never had a headache after that. And at that, that was a moment where I really learned a lot about myself, and I learned the importance of showing emotion. And even though I knew that that was something I needed to work on, it was still very difficult.
All right, so we're about done with this law. The main thing, I think Greene spoke about avoiding being a martyr, and so you live on to fight another day, and also don't sacrifice that, so you lose your mobility when you try to become a martyr. And basically, if you're going to die, there's nothing else you can do, right? I mean,
that ends the fight, doesn't it?
Right. At least if you surrender, you can come back and fight again another day.
What I thought was interesting about his statement about martyrdom is he said it's better to live and wait until the power, and he called it, he said it was a pendulum. So he says wait for the pendulum to return, because eventually it will, and you'll be alive to see it. Because power fades, and people grow stronger and weaker throughout their lives. Power shifts with time from one place to another, and if you're not alive to see that, what's the point?
And we talked about this book when this book first came out. I think it was like 1998 or 99. I remember I bought it as soon as it came out, and not many people had heard about it. And it eventually, next time I saw it a few years later, it was like in the bargain bin table, for like $2. And I wish I would have picked it up, because somewhere along that line it got popular again. 50 Cent came out, and I think with him writing the 50th Law, made it real popular. And now if you try to get the hardcover, it's like $50. And it's funny because I gave away my copy to one of my bosses, and figured I'll go to the store and pick up another one for a couple bucks. The next time I saw it, I was like, holy crap, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I've given away so many different books to let people read. I never get them back,
but the pendulum swung on him.
Right.
So he dipped, and then it came back, and really the book became a bestseller again.
Yeah, I'm looking through my notes here, and this might be a great way to end this discussion as we talk about surrendering and transforming weakness into power. The quote is from an Ethiopian proverb, and I think it just says it all, and really kind of wraps this up for us. When the great Lord passes, the wise peasant bows deeply and silently farts. Think about that. On the exterior, you could show that respect and bow deeply, but you're passing gas. I think that's such a great
what could they
disrespect.
say? It's just like, this guy stinks, man. Yeah.
But don't give up your values. Don't give up your beliefs, and stop. Don't ever not be who you are. But that doesn't mean that deferring to authority is a weakness. You might just not be in a position, and also recognize that there is a cost to power, and it might feel good to get up in that police officer's face and tell him how wrong he is, but they have the power to arrest you and to make your life hell and throw your ass in jail. So it's better to be respectful, be polite, and then maybe pass gas as you're walking away. I don't know.
And on that note, thanks for listening. I'm Tom Stewart.
Till next time.
Yep. Check out A Swift Kick in the Ass website. There you can download a 10-page action plan free of charge. All we ask for is your email, and we'll not spam you. Promise. Thanks for listening. Later.